Okay, so we've been talking about different research designs, so we're going to move on to the next piece of research methodology, which is to think about how we're going to frame the particular study that we're going to do around a hypothesis. So you probably are familiar with the idea of a hypothesis. It's a statement that's testable and disprovable. So a hypothesis is not a question. A hypothesis needs to be something we can pragmatically and ethically do, and it needs to be stated unidirectionally. In other words, um, if I say either cats are smarter than dogs or they're not, that's not disprovable, right? So maybe it's testable, but it's not disprovable. So that would not be a hypothesis. So make sure that the question that you stated at the beginning of this video lecture, make sure you've stated that in an appropriate, testable, disprovable statement. And so now we're going to consider this particular question. Now there's this Mickey Gilley song from, I don't know, like the 70s, that talks about the idea of beer goggles. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the idea, but the basic gist is as time wears on at a bar, people start to look more attractive. So Gilley sings this line, all the girls all get prettier at closing time, they all get to look like movie stars. So think about, could you actually test Mickey Gilley's contention as a hypothesis? So I encourage you to pause the video, see if you can rephrase Mickey Gilley's contention as a testable, disprovable statement. As it turns out, James Pennebaker and his colleagues actually tested this phenomenon, which is just like hilarious and awesome, and they did this research in a bar. So let me tell you the methodology. Experimenters who were, graduate research assistants, experimenters entered bars. I don't even know what community this was in, but they go into the bar in this community at one of three different times of night. They go in at 9 p.m., or they go in at 10:30 p.m., or they go in at midnight. And in this town, all of the bars close at 12:30. So we're getting closer to midnight, closer to closing time, especially at the midnight time point. So they go up to participants, they go up to people in the bar who are not visibly drunk. So these are people who are not slurring and stammering and swaying all over the bar. They go to these participants and they say, can you tell us on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is not attractive, 5 is average, and 10 is extremely attractive? Look at the people of the other sex around you and rate them in terms of how attractive you think they are. Now, yeah, okay, this is sexist, and yeah, this is also, promoting heterosexism. That's the probably if you were to do this today, you would be a little bit more sensitive. Think of the time in which this was occurring, right? 1979. So they asked these people to rate the people in the bar. How hot or not do you think they are? Then they also said, if you were a member of the opposite sex, so if they were asking women, they would say, pretend you're a man. How would you rate women here tonight using that same scale? So they asked, number 1, how hot do you think the people of the opposite gender are? And number 2, how hot do you think they think you collectively are right now? And they got the data from these people again at 9 p.m. or at 10:30 p.m. or at midnight, and they looked at their data. So pause a moment here and see if you can identify the independent variable and the dependent variable in Pennebaker's study. You should have figured out that the independent variable is the time of assessment. So did they collect their data at 9 p.m., at 10:30 p.m., or midnight? Those are the 3 conditions of the independent variable. The dependent variable were the attractiveness ratings. So how attractive, there are actually 2 dependent variables, right? One is my level of attraction toward the other people in the bar, and then there was also the how attractive do I think they think my gender is. One thing to note is there are always, for any given study, lots of different ways we can define a particular variable in this particular study. So we said our independent variable is the time of assessment. Why did they decide on 9 p.m., 10:30 p.m., and midnight? I don't know. They could have done 7 p.m., 11:23 p.m., and 12:05 a.m. Right? I don't know. They just decided that. So as the researcher, you have some choices to make. How are you going to measure the time of assessment? Prettier, right? Like we said, how pretty or how attractive are these people? For this study, they did it on a 1 to 10 scale. Why didn't they use 1 to 100? Why didn't they use -50 to +50? I don't know. That's just how they decided to do it. But the operational definition of a variable is how it's defined in this exact study, which is probably not going to be the same way that prettiness would be measured in somebody else's study. So they did their data collection. They collected participants' ratings of attractiveness of all these people at the bar. And here are their results. So the blue line indicates people of the same sex, and the yellow line indicates people of the opposite sex. So let's go through the yellow line first. The yellow line essentially shows how attractive do they think are your potential dates or your potential mates. From 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., there wasn't much of a change. So people who are early bar drinkers and people who are middle of the night bar drinkers, they don't really say these people are way more attractive. But look at the sharp increase from 10:30 p.m. till midnight. Remember, the bar is going to close at 12:30. The bar is about to close in 30 minutes. All of a sudden, we see an uptick in the perceived attractiveness of the other sex people who are in the bar. I'll ask for an explanation in a moment, but let's just hold on to that. The blue line indicates how fierce is the competition, essentially. Right? So they asked men, if you were a woman, how attractive do you think you would find the men here? And for the women, they said, if you were a man, how attractive do you think you would find the women here? This, even though it looks like there's a drop from 9 to 10:30, that's actually not statistically significant given their data. So there was not a significant change over time. This suggests that people didn't just say, oh yeah, everybody's getting more attractive as time went on. They said, only people of the opposite sex appear to me as though they're getting more attractive as time goes on. So they supported Pennebaker's original expectations. They got their expected result. The ratings did go up. Mickey Gilley's initial contention was supported. But why might that be? Right? So Mickey Gilley originally said, all the girls get prettier at closing time. They all get to look like movie stars. But why might that be? There's a lot of different possibilities, and I encourage you to pause the video and see if you can brainstorm 3 or 4 different possibilities here. So it could be that the more you drink, the worse your vision gets, and so you can't tell that that person over there is not super attractive. It could be that your peers are pressuring you to go home with somebody, and they're saying, oh man, that person is so hot, and you're like, oh really? Yeah, okay, yeah, they're kind of hot, okay. And so you think this person is more attractive because your peers are telling you. Maybe it's desperation, right? Maybe as it gets closer, you really want to go home with somebody. All of a sudden, somebody who seemed more like a 5 is looking more like a 7 now. And you say, you know what, I could go home with that person. That'd be okay. That's what Mickey Gilley contends. And so here's another line from that same song. Ain't it funny, ain't it strange, the way a man's opinions change when he starts to face that lonely night. So Pennebaker's trying to get at this beer goggles phenomenon. Why is it that these people start getting more attractive as the night goes on? Well, perhaps Mickey Gilley's right? Maybe it's desperation. Now, this study doesn't necessarily rule out those alternative explanations. Maybe, you get tired as the night wears on and you find people more attractive because of tiredness rather than desperation, right? So that study by itself is really interesting, but it's not necessarily the be-all and the end-all of this line of research.